Welcome to the Hard Faith Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Fulmar, and founder of Hard Faith. I've been working in the film and television world for over 15 years. On Hard Faith, we're about asking difficult questions about life and faith in an R-rated world. We release monthly. You can subscribe and share today. You can also write in at info@hardfaith.com to ask questions or to learn about opportunities to sponsor or to be on the show. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Hard Faith Podcast. Today we have our distinguished guest, author, actor, writer, director, producer, Nathan Clarkson. There could be more titles that I'm not aware of, but these are the titles that I know of. I've known Nathan for about 8 years now. We actually almost lived across the street from each other, and I'm so excited to have him on the show today. Nathan Clarkson, welcome to the Hard Faith.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I can't believe that we've known each other that long, which means we're both getting to be old men.
We're getting to be very old men, but but this
we're
year,
about to live across the street again. So I'm going to be back in LA and we're going to get up to a lot of trouble.
Yeah, you are. Nathan reached out to me right after my film press for Generational Sins, and he was attracted to kind of the edgier faith-based films. And we are now collaborating on a new faith-based, hard faith, PG-13 romance Western film called Bright Sky.
That's right. I'm bringing you down from R and you're bringing me up from PG. So we're going to see how this works. We'll either get everyone watching it or literally no one's going to want to watch our film because it's not edgy enough and it's not family friendly enough. But I mean, I think we're going to make magic. I cannot wait to do this with you.
I cannot wait either. We shot 4 scenes in LA last month, and they are beautiful, well shot, well exposed, and wonderful performances, wonderful casting. And now we're going to shoot the rest of the film in June in Colorado. So keep checking in for updates, either with Nathan's podcast. You want to do a little plug for the Overthinkers?
Yeah. Come on by. I host a podcast with a friend and film critic, Joseph, and it's called The Overthinkers. We talk about pretty much literally everything. If it's a question that people have asked, we try to get on there and answer it, and we answer it with people who are experts in their field. That can be theology, culture, film, art, existence. Just we like to answer questions because we think that's important to discovering truth, and we want you to hang out. So that's what we do on The Overthinkers.
It's a great podcast. I had the pleasure of jumping on the show for a second time recently. And they have incredible guests. They have also a Facebook group, the Overthinkers Facebook private group. Some great memes there. So Nathan is a filmmaker, he's a podcaster, and he's an author. Tell us about your books and your upcoming title that we're talking about today.
Yeah, so if it has to do with stories and connection and messages and questions and thought, I want to be a part of it. That's why I got into film. That's why I wanted to be an actor in the first place. I loved stories because stories are the things that connect to our hearts, that connect to our minds. You know, this is how we were created, to respond and connect with stories. And so naturally, I went into acting and filmmaking and writing, as this is the way that we share stories, especially today. I'd say the way that our culture, our generation, our society shares stories like we always have throughout all of history is through film and movies. And that's really why I've lived in Hollywood and New York City in this industry for as long as I have. And this is why I'm still passionate about it, because stories are important, because stories are human. And so this new book that I wrote, it's a bit of a memoir, a bit of a thought piece, a little bit of everything, but it explores my journey from a young, starry-eyed kid who both loved Jesus and wanted to be an actor in movies, and explored the intersection of faith and story. It's called Finding God in Hollywood. And it kind of goes through my story, my thoughts, my time on set, my conversations I had with actors and celebrities, my time of making movies, my time of just existing in the city that's centered around stories. And so it's a book that is all about that told from my perspective. And I really am so excited for this to come out. It's a book that's been over a decade in the making, because I've been at this for a while. Like I said, I'm an old man, but it's the things I'm most passionate about. It's my faith and stories.
Finding God in Hollywood. What a great title. What a great subject matter. And I also think that a lot of people are going to be interested in this topic because I think that in some Christian audiences, especially people that haven't been to Hollywood or don't know the film industry or have only heard negative things about the film industry, it feels sort of antithetical, God and Hollywood. And so tell me about that. Tell me about what it was like living as a Christian in Hollywood, coming back to Hollywood. What are your fears, hopes, dreams? And what is it like to live your faith authentically in the Hollywood location, but also the Hollywood industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually right now in the midst of writing a piece for a website called The Collision, which is things that Christians don't understand about Hollywood or get wrong. And I go through a few of the things that I think Christianity has created, these kind of boogeymen or understandings or misunderstandings rather about this industry. You know, the church and Hollywood have kind of been butting heads for, I don't know, almost a century now, you know, and it's interesting that the church and Hollywood are two of the most prominent, influential institutions in our world, and just powerful and far-reaching. So it's really interesting that they have this such tumultuous relationship. But for me personally, what it looks like is how do I live my faith in Hollywood? It's how I live my faith anywhere. It's, you know, faith is central to me. It's what dictates how I think, how I see the world, how I see other people, and how I see myself. And so when that moves into the idea of acting or storytelling, it's something that informs how I do that. And so if I'm going to tell a story, I'm going to, you know, make a movie or write a book, I'm going to look at my faith and how it affects how I see the world. And I'm going to let my faith remind me about redemption and remind me about hope and remind me about reality too. And so my faith informs everything I do and in every action I take. And so for me, living out my faith in Hollywood is like I live it anywhere. I'm going to let it inform everything I do and every project I choose to be a part of, and every role I have. I'm going to try to bring as much truth and beauty and redemption as possible to it. And so my faith is not something I just experience on Sundays and then I go out and live a different kind of life, or I leave it there. It's something I take with me every minute, every second of the day that ultimately shapes everything I do and how I see everything. And that absolutely transfers when it comes to Hollywood acting and writing.
I love that. This is the Hard Faith podcast. Tell me, what is the hardest part about living out your faith in Hollywood, or just faith in general for you?
Faith in general. You know, I always talk about how, and while I totally understand other people might not have this experience, my struggle with God has not often been his existence. And I know that is something for other people. For me, my belief in God is for whatever reason, I've always just kind of believed in his existence. I understand that God is there. I can't look at the world and the design and the intention behind it and not see a creator. You know, I'm an artist, so I see the artistry of God everywhere. My difficulty and my frustration with God has often been, does he care and is he good? And so a lot of times I've struggled with this view of God that he's a far off, not non-existent, just non-caring entity, that he doesn't see the struggle in the world, that he doesn't see the hurt in the world, and he doesn't see the hurt and struggle in my own life when I feel like he's not doing anything or doesn't care. So my doubts don't center around the existence of God, but rather the goodness of God. And so when it comes to my faith and my struggle, it's remembering the goodness of God, because it's so difficult sometimes. And I feel like perhaps this is probably more widespread than a lot of people want to admit. You know, we often, Spencer, you and I have talked about in Christian movies and Christian films, it seems that people want to ignore the harder and more difficult parts of life. And that's why I was so, when I read about your work and I engaged with your work and saw it, I was so relieved that there was someone out there who was asking those questions that so often aren't present in Christian art, that they often get ignored. The questions that are really difficult to answer as people of faith, the questions that deal with the darkness of life. And so when it comes to my difficulty of is God good? Does he actually care to be involved in the more difficult, dirtier, messier parts of my life? That's the thing I struggle with. And that's the thing I want to engage with in my art and the stories I tell. And that's why I was so happy to connect with someone like you all those years ago, who was actively and really only I mean, you were, as far as I could tell, you and David Schultz were about the only two guys in Hollywood, making movies about faith, but that dealt with the real messiness of life, because that was the struggle I was having and continue to have. And pieces of art like that, I think, will touch people more than just a shiny, clean version of, hey, everything's okay and everything's great, everyone's smiling, because all of us experience messiness. And I think a lot of us have trouble believing that God is good. And I want to see more art like that display the difficulty of believing God is good while still providing redemption and hope at the end. And I just, that's what I'm drawn towards. And I'm always so in awe of your work that does that.
Thank you, Nathan. Great answer. I couldn't agree more. And I think that your films, I know that we're making together your fifth feature film. And your previous films, I think, have really tackled that tension well about living in a very broken, dark world and yet having a redemptive, loving God and believing that he's good. Tell me about your book. Tell me about finding God in Hollywood. Did you find God in Hollywood? What should audiences expect?
Yeah, I found him everywhere. And I didn't expect to. I talked a little bit about the misconceptions the church has about Hollywood. And when I would listen to people talk about it, it was basically a Sodom and Gomorrah that was absent of God's presence. And I believe in a God who's everywhere all the time. And I believe in a God who created reality, and every human is created in his image. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And so when I went to Hollywood, I expected to find this, derelict, dark place where God was not. And what I found was, while there was darkness and there was brokenness, like there is everywhere, by the way, even in the church, I found that God was on set. He was in the eyes of the homeless man I would cross on the street. He was in the hearts of the actors longing for some immortality or attention. He was in every relationship I had. He was in the director's eyes as a director was trying to create a world and explore what true meaning is. So God was absolutely everywhere. And that's what I hope to do in the chapters of these books, is explore a wide variety of stories where I saw God in every inch of Hollywood.
I love that. The Hard Faith podcast is not afraid of controversy. What are some chapters, portions, sections of the books that may be controversial to someone picking up the title, just based on the title, picking up the book?
That's a good question. It's interesting. This book is the one that's had the hardest time getting traction with Christian audiences out of all of my books. And I can't help but think, I can never prove or know, but I can't help but think it's because I address some of the problems with the perspectives in practices in my own community of faith in the church. And I try to do it in a loving way, in an exhorting way, but they are honest. And I think, interestingly enough, the controversial parts will be the parts about, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which is in there. And maybe there will be some controversy from Christians about, reading those stories. But often what I have found thus far with the people who have read this book that struggle with it are the thoughts about modern Christianity right now, and its proclivity to try to do one of two things: either escape the world entirely and live in this kind of sectarian place where they can create their own culture away from culture, or on the other extreme where you just become culture and you lose any defining factor about who you are and what you believe. And that's a real frustration for me, because I want to be buried in culture, buried in the place that is creating the stories that affect the world. But I also want to do it as someone who is completely defined as someone of faith. And I think that's probably the most controversial thing. And there's my critique or criticism, or I'll call it exhortation of my own faith-based community, Christians. So I think that's what I've received the most pushback thus far on.
I believe it. I think your book really handles that subject matter well. I think it's a good admonition for the church, especially people uncomfortable with Hollywood. Let's talk a little bit about the physical place of Hollywood. You and I met first in Hollywood, almost living across the street from each other. And then you met your lovely wife. You all moved to New York City. You've been there for 4 years now?
Yeah.
What is it like moving back to Hollywood? If audiences don't know, spoiler alert, Nathan's moving back to Hollywood. So
that's right.
What is it like living in the physical industry, the TMZ, the 30 mile zone of Los Angeles County. And how is it different from living even in New York City or other creative hubs around the world?
Oh, that is a great question. It's one I've actually been pondering a lot as I've considered moving back. You know, I don't know if you ever experienced this, but when I moved out of Los Angeles, funny thing is I've moved to Los Angeles and out of Los Angeles 3 times now. And now I'm moving back to Los Angeles. So there's something about that city.
There's something about it.
That keeps drawing me back. And, you know, every time I leave, I swear I'm never coming back. And it's usually after something really painful or traumatic or difficult that I leave. And then a few years down the road of living in New York City, because I always go to New York and back to LA, New York, there's something that happens where I start remembering the objective reality that's not painted with my own personal experiences or hardships or traumas, but really I start remembering the city. And visiting when we filmed the scenes from Bright Sky and being back actually in the city, the things that struck me were really interesting. And they're the things I remember having struck me for a decade whenever I spent time there. One is, you know, I've mentioned this already, but you know, there's not many cities that are entirely almost based and centered in orbit around one thing. You know, there's not a city where every accountant lives, right? There's not even a city where every, I don't know, I mean, maybe DC in politics, but that's the closest it comes. But in Hollywood, it's a city entirely oriented around art and story. Yeah. And that is both a beautiful and a scary thing. And there's pluses and minuses and difficulties and wondrous things about that. But that is something that always strikes me. This city is entirely around stories and art. And, you know, you go to any cafe, right? And you throw a rock at any one of the people sitting there. I promise you, there's 5 screenplays being written. You walk down the street and you talk to someone. I guarantee you they have their headshot in their pocket on their way to an audition. There's a good chance. And so that's a really amazing thing to all kind of be experienced in this desire and this vision together as a city, as a community. And you know, the dark parts of that is desire that's not led by God. That's not in a direction where He's the end. Our desire can lead us to stop short of Him at things that can be really detrimental and dark for us. But I still love the presence of the desire, because ultimately I think all desire is divine, and we're really longing after the desires that God has placed on every heart. So that's one of the things I love living there. But more practically, sorry, I went all metaphysical.
I like it.
But more practically, you know, I love New York. It is, but we live on top of each other here. By the way, literally, I mean, above me is about 10 stories of other people. In LA, you have this, it's spread out, which can be frustrating when you actually have to get anywhere or see friends on the other side of town. But I also kind of love the expanse of LA in Hollywood, the kind of never endingness of it. So I'm really excited to experience that again. And there's so many different flavors you can experience all around this wide city. So I'm excited for that. And last but not least, man, I love New York and I love seasons. And, you know, I always said as a young guy in my 20s, I can never live in a place without seasons. Let me tell you, in my 30s, I am ready for tepid weather all year long. So that's really why I'm moving back, for the nice warm weather.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I took a little break from LA myself. I was away for about 3 years, even in tepid environments like Orlando, Florida. But there is something about this city. I remember my wife and I moved back, you know, the first week of November of last year. And I said to her, you know, looking out of the hotel that we were staying at and looking at the city, we're staying in Universal City. I said, imagine if a city was built by artists. You know, imagine if there was like this creative hub where all the films that you'd seen growing up, all the movies that inspired you, maybe from around the world. But imagine if everyone that made all these films for the last 100 years that so influenced culture made a city. And that's Los Angeles. That's Hollywood. And it has pros and cons, as you've mentioned. But it is someplace that keeps drawing us back. I call it the island of misfit toys. If you didn't fit in wherever you grew up, you'll fit in Hollywood. You'll find your people. And you'll be
Yeah.
encouraged along the way. There's competition, but there's also a lot of encouragement, motivation for the starving artist, for the actor that continues to work despite never getting a proper audition. There is a home here, and there's a community that you can find that will encourage you and motivate you to keep pressing on and pursuing this crazy industry. We're running out of time, but give me some final thoughts. What was the original kind of initial thought that inspired this book, and why should audiences purchase this book, read it, listen to it? What makes it unique?
I think that if there's two things, and I'm excluding politics here, but if there's two things that the entire world, every single human engages with, let's just say on a kind of abstract level, it's stories and belief, but on a concrete level, on a cultural level, those are embodied by movies / Hollywood and the church. And I think that these are two of the most important and influential things that we can explore and understand. And they're the things that most of our lives are very often wrapped around. I mean, every article is about the new movie coming out. Every conversation is about who's your favorite actor. Or it's about what do you believe and what dictates your life and what does existence mean. And so I want to take the two things that I think mean something to everyone, that have relevance in everyone's lives, stories and faith, and Hollywood and the church. And I want to find, what do they have in common? And that's what I did when I lived in LA and live in Hollywood and work in this industry for over a decade, is I found that, man, these things don't just have a couple things in common. These things aren't powerful independently from each other in our lives. They are powerful and effective for the exact same reasons. And that's what I want to explore in this book, Hollywood and Faith.
I love it. And where can audiences find your book? And where will there be an Audible audiobook companion?
So they can find it anywhere books are sold. Head to Amazon or wherever you like to buy your books. But as far as as an audiobook companion, yes, it will be happening, but not right now, down the road. So you're going to have to read a book the old-fashioned way. You got to read the words, but just wait for all you audiobook lovers. It will be coming.
Wonderful. And what books do you have next? What can we anticipate?
Well, I can't tell you, but I'm working. I'll say this much: it's a book that I'm working on right now with my lit agent, and we are putting it together and going to take it out soon. But it's a book about why we all. How do I say this without saying it? It's a book about cancel culture and how to actually investigate the messiness and brokenness in our own souls. And as in addition to, I also have another book coming out next year called Unique, which is I was a kid who had mental illness and learning disabilities, and is helping parents and people see the uniquenesses of their kids and celebrate those. So I always have something coming out, so keep an eye out. It's always something. So just search my name. You'll find a new book that you can read by me, because I don't idle well and I get bored and just never stop trying to do and write things.
Yeah, I love that. We have that in common. Tell me, where can audiences follow you? What websites, links that we can advertise for this podcast?
Yeah, visit my website at nathanclarkson.me. You can find out more about me. You can send me any of your thoughts or just connect with me through there. You can also find me on pretty much any of the socials. Sometimes I'm more active, sometimes I'm less active, but Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, just my name, Nathan Clarkson, and I should pop up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathan, for coming on the Hard Faith podcast. This podcast is new, but we so appreciate artists like you coming on, describing your faith journey and all the exciting projects you have coming up. Thanks so much for listening to the Hard Faith podcast. Tune in next month to hear our next guest. Please subscribe and share.